way to connect my phone to this presentation, and then wireless is not working, and my ears are way too much, so I'm going to have to do this dance back and forth to press the button. So we did a performance on Friday. I'm sorry you missed it, but I'm going to tell you all about it. My name is Speer, and I came here with this initial research question that's been guiding my work for the past couple years. This term active citizen, which I've been defining as this engaged presence that is fully there and alive and recognizing that moment, and then citizenship. How do we engage with communities and forms of reciprocity and attention to that? And I'm curious how to cultivate that in a classroom setting or in a performance setting between my audience and the performers. So this is what I approached my team with. And to start off, I want to say that I saw us all as artists in the room, and that we were all on the same page and we're going to get just as dirty together. And this interesting notion of collaboration versus commission. And so it was really important to me that we would be collaborating rather than asking someone to create something as a tool for a means to an end. So Crystal had set up these tiers, and in the very core in the center were these team players with Rob from psychology, Sylvina from architecture, and Fiona from film studies. And so these were the folks that I figured we'd be meeting every day, and we'd roll up our sleeves and get our hands into the muck. And then peripherally, we had Andrea from, I have a friend that's named Andrea, and so then I'm like going back and forth between wanting to call you Andrea and it's Andrea. And Pam from public health. And then maybe more peripherally, but not so, was Susan Birch from American Studies, who you saw up on the stage, and Christopher Andrews from psychology. And really, I am not a genius solo artist. I make work with people. And so these lab partners and brainstormers were like advisory artists who we bounced ideas off of, and eventually got involved in that show on Friday. So brainstorming, down the rabbit hole we go. Active citizen, laid out on the table. And these are some of the 8 tangents that came out of many discussions around that term. So emotion as embodied mind, that we can maybe do a physical action, like theater exercises of frustration and tension, in order to bring about the emotion of anger. And then the role of gestures, such as what gestures could catalyze change, like hand-holding, shoulder rubs. Patterns and repetition, how we notice in protest movements, there's slogans that are repeated over and over again. There are movements repeated over and over again. And this interesting theater technique of repeating back and forth with another actor the same line back and forth, and seeing those words totally dissolve, create new meaning. You go through an emotional trajectory that might be separate from the actual words. And I also experienced this in one march in Boulder, that Black Lives Matter, repeated over and over again, suddenly dissolved and then reformulated and dissolved and reformulated. So repetition. And then, what is activism? So we came up with this idea that it's this energized state, this state of potential, charged, ready to act. And one question, can it be separated from cause? We went on the presumption that maybe it could be, that that energized activist state could be potentially universal, and if we create these states of energy, that can be directed into multiple avenues, multiple causes. that there was a continuum between empathy and activism, empathy being a deep care and understanding for a fellow human, into activism, which takes that care one step further into being prepared and ready to act. The role of conflict. So there always seems to be present in activist movement some form of conflict. And what if we considered conflict a creative tool? Yona described in developing a script, one method is to put conflict into the script, and that creates a level of interest. And then Rob from psychology was like, oh, by the way, humans really don't like conflict, so they try to alleviate it as soon as possible. And there are two methods that we've kind of noticed, one being assimilation, where people take the dissonance, the disconnect, and somehow make it part of their schema. So a simple example he had was a child sees a plane and calls it a bird, because all things that fly are birds, so that plane is suddenly part of that schema. Versus accommodation, which meaning changing the framework. So suddenly the schema has to shift. So not all things that fly are birds, thus we can have airplane and a bird. And this changing of the framework is actually pretty hard. And I was really struck by this, like, how do we change the rules? How do we change how we view our world? How do we change how the world functions? And I think this is the hardest step for all these social movements and revolutions, that you have status quo, and how do you shift that? How do you dream of another reality, which can be really, really challenging because of this unknown. The unknown and the uncertainty of something outside of our imagination is really frightening. In Contact Improv, Nancy Stark-Smith has this underscore, and one principle of it is this idea of the gap. And she's this delightful human being. She's like, just see if you can sit in the gap. And the gap meaning you don't know what your next choice is going to be. So you're in this moment of, I don't know what action to do. This is stupid. Should I shift? Should I go over there? Should I dance with that person? And she encourages participants to sit in that gap a little bit longer because it's uncomfortable, but the possibility is there. So first week was going really, really well. All these ideas, and all of a sudden I realized we'd come into the room, we'd sit in a circle, and we were still sitting there. And playing and dealing with these theories, but they were just ideas or words. And the hardest, biggest roadblock for me was moving from theory to practice. And how could we test an idea to see if our fancies were even a truth, a reality, functional? So we started to come up with an experiment. So one step I took was try to find out what our skills were and what things we do in order to see what maybe we could contribute. And the prevailing theme that we played upon was this idea of conflict and comfort. That maybe they're the same side, two sides of the same coin, somehow related. So taking architecture, psychology, film, movement, these all merged into our experiment. So the first idea was space. And if we wanted to create some way to create an experience or have people participate, we needed to do it not in the theater. So we staged this event in Johnston. On my first day, I got really charged emotions about this building. Are people familiar with Johnston? on my tour of the campus, it was pointed out, this building is really ugly on the outside, and it's really ugly on the inside. And then one professor was like, I hate teaching in Johnson. But then, to counter that, I heard it's beautiful. You can see the form and the function, and everything's exposed, and there's a symmetry to it. And I, too, have fallen in love with Johnson. It's quite hostile. The exposed concrete, the lines, do not create a place of comfort. And to note, there is only one entrance that you can wheel in directly, and that only gets you to one floor. And the only other movement possibility is the freight elevator. So in this space, we created a living room set to put comfort and cozy inside conflict. So then we incorporated film. Let's see if this even works. I'll go here. This may be disorienting, so you can continue to look at me if you don't want to look at the screen. So we were interested in embodied camera work, so the camera being part of the body and incorporating that technology, that instinct in it. And so in addition to filming the event, we played with a GoPro, which you can strap on in different ways and go into these amazing adventures underwater. It's like nearly indestructible. So this is a test where it's on my arm, also upside down. And so we had this projected live during the show as the dancers were moving to give a sense of disorientation, embodied disorientation, hopefully to the audience. And then the experience. So we were cooking, we had cookies in this toaster oven and cinnamon buns. So you had the smell of comfort. The living room was filled with all these tactile engagements. There were Legos, different textured rugs, things to read, things to play with, so interactive element. And then on another projection was a narration of the experience where our lovely Susan was describing the whole scene, and then her words in real time were being projected on this wall so people could read a description of the scene. So the lovely Celeste, who's in the house, was available to work with me. I'll keep going. So our ideas of conflict brought up a lot of physical score, rules, textures that I was playing in with the studio. Susan, in one workshop, described conflict as this idea of slippage and retrofitting, that maybe gears, a sense of gears, that it's not only high impact collision, but maybe that there's some sense of function, somehow the friction creates function. And then also, I was really interested in contact improv, which has this sense of care and listening, but also using each other's body weight to create push and tension. And so Celeste and I created this phrase where I offered words that I had highlighted from reading different articles that were talking about a conflict or a war. And so I would offer wage war, negotiate peace, annihilate it, and then we would create a movement that was in contact with each other together to create this phrase. matters was when that moved now. And one trial run in the space, it worked.
Yeah.
Maybe it would help for both to ask you questions now, to distract you from this dilemma, or no?
We'll see how multifunctional I am. I might just skip that. And hopefully this will work. So here's the experiment.
Chris, do you know how to do this? Are you comfortable? 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 Comfortable? Are you 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 comfortable?
What do you tell yourself that everything's going to be all right? Everything's going to be all right. For the better. It always turns out for the better. Are you sure? It always turns out for the better.
It always turns out for the better. Are you sure? It always turns out for the better. Are you sure? It always.
Are you comfortable? Are you comfortable? Are you comfortable? All right. Are you comfortable? What? I don't know! activities, this was really fascinating. When people were invited into the living room space, when they were invited to play with Legos, they suddenly had a sense of purpose and were more comfortable when they didn't know what to do. That there were levels of invitation. There was a clear distinction. Playing with Legos was permissible, but even though you received that sticky bun, nobody could bring themselves to eat during the performance. And then something that was really underthought in just kind of putting it there, that narration on the wall was really intriguing. And so this is some next steps that I would offer how this experiment could go further and other possibilities. That we could investigate this narration further. Sylvina mentioned she felt compelled, it was describing her in the space, and she felt compelled to change the narrative. And what if it had a different tone? Susan was a little mild, and it appeared objective, but its description really objective. What if the tone was more offensive? What if different people described? Where would this narration be located? This idea of audience invitation, the participation, the interaction, how could maybe text and character, Fiona's offering very insistently of the sticky buns was really captivating for folks. And then the movement and the action could be developed further, that the pedestrian tasks could become repetitive and then move into action that then moved into movement. The Celeste in my duet with Sylvina was more peripheral, and also I don't think it fully captured risk, and how could the movement have done both conflict and comfort. And then this other idea that Chris mentioned in talking with him once, what about other visualizations? So this is just an example of one flat thing by William Forsythe that Ohio State University incorporated architecture, computer science to create these different visuals of the choreography and different representations. So in brainstorming, Christopher's like, well, what if we could somehow track the audience reaction of comfort, discomfort, participation, and then what if we could translate that into a different visual representation? And then how could we process that information in a different way? And then the best part, we could just zoom back out. We could start all over. We could go back to our brainstorming ideas and go down a different road. I have this need to go back to the initial question, how does that experiment relate to activism? Were there any things that we learned that could be used by a cause or a movement? Or was it completely isolated? And then there were just two other points. Elements to take, like, were there specific things that happened in the experiment that we would want to use in a different way? And then the critical lens. How are representations of race, class, ability in this experiment? Who was not included? What got reinforced that we might, as creators, would not want to just perpetuate? So taking a critical look at what took place to further the next experiment, that hopefully we would reach a larger audience or have a different sort of impact. So I think switching gears and inviting my team players, and if the other folks want to come up and join for the Q&A. All right, you are welcome.
I'll grab some chairs and I can. Anyone have a question? Burning questions.
I have a quick one.
Yes, sir.
What was the kind of demographic of people that were there that came to the space? 'Cause in the video,
The demographic of the people who participated in the installation or came by Johnson.
Yeah. In terms of discipline, we had a variety. It was sometimes it was the first opportunity for some of my collaborators to perform. Half of the audience were dancers, Scotty and Sveta that teach here, and some of the dance students. And then half were from the building. Monica, who runs kind of Johnson and activities there, and 2 studio art students, and Colin, who was absolutely amazing, also got pulled in. So in that way, the demographic was varied in that sense, but I think racially, there weren't other experiences there.
Other questions? Yes.
How do you think the outcome of your piece would have changed if you had represented, well, I mean, I noticed that most of the demographics were white and female. How do you think the piece would have changed if you represented more races, sexual identities, genders?
Good question, because I was creating kind of my grandmother, like my sense of my grandmother's living room. We encountered a different sense of cultures welcoming, where do you want to describe how you welcome?
Yes, so I'm from Romania, so I come from a very traditional society, and I incorporated that in the way I offered the cinnamon buns to people, and they kept saying no, and I kept saying, but please, just have one. No, no, come on, just one, and just persisting to see how far you can push that until somebody just gets angry, which has happened to me in the United States. And also, as Kate said, you know, people pick it up and just not eat it because they wanted to participate and be polite, but not really wanting to eat it. Although we were eating, so obviously they weren't poisoned. But I think we did think a lot about, maybe not a lot, but we did think about the gender representations, and Susan actually had a good point, and she urged us to think about, you know, how to combine this domesticity with the, you know, the idea of traditional role and sort of trying to break that. So we had, all of us kind of took turns doing different activities, and, you know, the men, Rob and Chris, were supposed to also take turns sweeping the floor and baking and, you know, cleaning and doing that kind of stuff. So we tried to think about gender diversity a little bit.
Okay, I think it's a really interesting point, and I was looking at how the other groups, the previous teams were formed, and yeah, I suddenly realized our team is pretty much like all white women, and probably I'm the only one that's not considered to be white. So. One thing that I know for sure that the creative process will change a lot, and the beauty of this method that Kate explained and that we build from all of us, I think it really allows that flexibility to happen. So I think really cultures, different cultures will impact an experiment like this, like even if not only the performers or the artists are from different cultures or different ethnicities, but also if the audience is more diverse. So they will have, of course, completely different responses. So one thing that I really want to emphasize is that this process is completely open, and the beauty of this is that it was really built up from all of us. So it wasn't like Kate explained at the beginning, it's the mastermind, and I'm going to have this idea, so, and then we follow. So it will really brainstorming and bouncing ideas with all of us. And I think that's great.
Other questions? Spaces? Questions? Spaces?
No, you can
One of the things we did with Kate really early on was called contact improv, and I was really struck by it. We spent, I don't know, an hour or so in the studio working with each other's bodies and structurally supporting one another. So leaning against each other and knowing that if Sylvina moved, I would fall down and vice versa. And as an architect, that was very interesting to me. But also it broke down the barriers between us so that during the experiment, we felt much more comfortable interacting with each other. Intentionally use the word comfortable. So, at one point I was lying on the couch and I put my feet on Luana's lap, and, I couldn't imagine doing that with people. It was a familiarity, break down the barriers exercise. Wonder if we couldn't try some things like that with our students to engage them more in familiar conversation in classroom.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry, were you gonna say something?
I probably don't need much. So I was at the experiment on Friday, and it's interesting. I'm a person who's used to performing and being on stage and being in charge, but when the roles are reversed and you're pulled into the piece in another way, I mean, I was the person who couldn't eat the cinnamon roll. Like, it sat on my lap for the entire time. And why would that bother me? And it was really, I just felt like the entire experiment was very full. I didn't feel like there was a lapse. I didn't feel like people weren't all there. Everybody had a role, had a job, was on board, and they seemed quite comfortable in my discomfort. Repeatedly hearing, "Are you comfortable?" which, as who I am as a person, makes me want to answer. So I kept talking to people, and it was really interesting. I mean, I'm sure it was a great sociological experiment because all of the things that come up to make your space comfortable absolutely came up. The 4 students who were playing with Legos did not look up. As soon as they had a project, they made their own comfort zone. And the conversation that came out of that, I think, was really interesting. I'm just offering all of this because Kate sort of didn't have time to, put all of that out there, but there was a lot of great conversation that happened, a lot of discussion and discussion about how it could be pushed further and what people felt and what people thought. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Great. Yes, we have one more, Jonathan.
I was wondering if Kate could talk a little bit about the choice to do this site specifically. I think that's a really interesting idea related to this program because we're here in the theater, the dance theater, where dance happens, where movement happens. This is where we expect to have movement. And it's interesting that you chose to go into a different community and actually go to them. Could you talk a little bit about that choice?
Yes. One tangent that we talked about was us versus them mentality and participant versus observer. And just in my artistic realm, I'm curious of this dichotomy of passive versus active spectatorship, which I also think is problematic to frame it that way, but really curious of how can we make a performance like a hiking trip, where I was in Boulder and people would be so gung-ho to go hiking or go out into the wilderness, but then when they come into a theater, I don't know if you came to the show this weekend, but it's that negotiation of how do you pull the audience on stage. And there are instances where it's very uncomfortable, it's difficult, it's not this issue of consent. And so I'm just really fascinated, and maybe because I'm terrified of the audience, want to push myself in that direction.
Well, thank you so much. Those are our 3 artists. I really want to give you my sincere gratitude for being here today, for being a part of this process, whether you're a faculty collaborator, an artist, or just a person in the audience. You are really making this thing come alive. This is Middlebury's first chance or first opportunity to be a part of these Mellon Creative Campus initiatives. And your feedback is very important to keep this thing alive. So again, if you have feedback for us, thoughts, concerns, or even just epiphanies as you were sitting in the audience listening to these artists or these faculty members, please email us those. movementmatters@middlebury.edu. If you can't remember that, just crystal@middlebury.edu. Right, and we'll take all these things into consideration as we're trying to make the best decision of who to keep for the next 2 years. And I want to be very clear and explicit that we are not trying to assess who is the best out of these 3 individual, unique artists and processes. We are trying to figure out who as a community we can support the best. And that will actually give us the information we need coming from the community. So thank you so much for coming, and remember that movement matters.